We are back with another video. Okay, I'm bored in the house. Bored in the house and I'm in the house. Okay, see, it's worse than I thought. Seriously, I am back with another video, and today we are going to cover me being a therapy dropout and why you should still go anyway. So if you want to hear about my most recent experience with therapy, why I definitely still advise everyone to still go to therapy, then stay tuned. And you know, as a bonus, you get to watch me put on a face, so it's like a twofer. You get to hear me talk about something that is important to us, and you get to watch me get a little cute. Anyway, stay tuned. I mean, just sit there and like, it's about to happen. Like, you don't have to do anything. The video, it's like, it's coming up as soon as I stop talking. Yeah. So while I may be talking about this particular experience, I will absolutely engage in therapy again at some point. Not just like when something is happening to cause me stress, but before that, I'm just in an in-between sort of space right now. You know, I definitely grew up Black. Surprise. I grew up Black and certainly heard a lot of the things that a lot of us hear about therapy. You know, don't be telling white folks your problems. Therapy is for white folks. You know, pray about it. Like I've heard all of those sorts of things and subscribe to them. And I found myself in college raising 3 children as an undergrad, and just, you know, I had a lot on my plate because, you know, I was raising 3 babies, which meant that I was also, you know, needed to work a job while I was in school. So I wasn't just in school and raising children. I was usually in school raising children and working a job of some sort. And so, like, overwhelmed is probably a pretty big understatement, right? Like, I operated at a steady pace of overwhelmed. And so typically it was just a matter of like, you know, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And I did that for a while. At some point in undergrad, my grandmother died. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, you know, like a lot of people, I love my grandmother. My grandmother was more to me and for me because I did not have a relationship with my father before he died. My father was killed when I was 10 years old, and I did not have a relationship with him. You know, I don't know what the deal was. He had other children that he did have relationships with, but my twin brother and I were not among those children. And so my grandmother, though, really stepped in and did a lot of, you know, things to help support us as far as like, you know, doing all the grandmother stuff, like, you know, buying you school clothes and stuff like that, and, you know, spending time at her house. Alex Trebek's passing was really something because I remember like we watched Jeopardy, like a lot of folks did with their grandmothers. And so, yeah, and you know, she just really filled, I think, a gap that would have otherwise have been there around having some connection to the other side of my family, because really without her that probably wouldn't have been the case because my father didn't make that happen. And so she died, and, you know, it hit me, like death hits you and like grief hits you. And certainly wasn't the first time that I had experienced, you know, the death of someone close to me and grief in that way. If you have followed my story, you know that my twin brother was killed when we were 17 years old. And so grief was a thing that I was very much familiar with. Really, in ways that no one should be familiar with, but certainly not someone as young as I was, because I was also born and raised on the south side of Chicago. And so, you know, even before my twin brother's death, I had certainly seen my share of death. I mean, this was the 1990s in Chicago. So I am no longer in Chicago. I am in Central Illinois, going to school, and my grandmother dies, and I'm already like navigating or juggling all these things, right? So like I'm there and I'm juggling school, I'm juggling work, I'm juggling the babies, and then here comes this additional ball that someone just like throws at me, and it's grief. And so it's a really heavy one, and it's bigger than some of the others at that time, and I dropped all the balls. I was extremely stressed. I also managed depression. If you know me, you know that. And it was a lot. And so I found myself in a position of just really not knowing what to do, and not really knowing who to talk to. And I don't even know who first suggested it. Not even sure. It's been so long. But ultimately, I made the decision to go and talk to somebody. And what I got out of that wasn't even really around my grandmother's death. It was more around the ways that I was managing all of the things. And that particular round of therapy really taught me about how I do navigate the things. How I tend to take everything as like the big picture, instead of taking small bites out of things, So it was a healthy experience. It was actually a white therapist. At that particular time with therapy, I was really concerned with whether the therapist was Christian. So that was the determining factor for me at that point. And so I got out of it what I needed to get out of it, which was sort of some immediate assistance with navigating and balancing all of the things that were on my plate. And of course, while, therapy doesn't take anything off your plate, doesn't take anything off your plate, it certainly can give you the tools to navigate or even put down, take some things off your plate. So cool. At that point, I don't have any horrible experiences with therapy, so I am good to go. Well, I still don't have any horrible experiences with therapy, to be clear. The experience I'm going to tell you about is not horrible. It just was a thing. So I move on with my life, yada yada, boom, boom, boom. I navigate depression for a considerable time after, because while I had sought therapy to address that particular immediate need, I had never sought therapy to address, my childhood trauma, which is pretty extensive. And so I just kind of carried along, just, not really addressing that. And so I just basically, basically I just figured out how to navigate grief along with, how to juggle grief along with those other balls. I'm trying to keep the analogy straight here. So I carried on like that. And then, married along, and just would alternately sort of do that. Just kind of, things are too much. Let me pull out some tools to navigate this. And transparently, sometimes that tool was compartmentalization. Very much. Compartmentalization, dissociation were tools that I was using to navigate and to survive. And, I am not saying that those tools are wrong tools. I'm saying that those are not the healthiest tools, and we can learn other tools. But in the face of survival, if, dissociation and compartmentalization is really dissociation, but if those things get you through in that moment, by all means. So fast forward to a life of that, and I'm in the DMV working in DC, and I take a job in the women's rights space, a space I've been in or have been in for quite some time. And I take this job, and it is hell from very early. Like, it was hell from so early that, like, a couple weeks after starting, I was trying to contact one of the organizations that I had turned down to see if they had filled their position yet. Like, a few weeks in, I was like, this ain't it. And, you know, there are all these different sorts of things around, like how soon you leave a job. I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to the notion that you should endure trauma for extensive periods of time because staying at a job longer is going to look better on your resume. So that wasn't really a concern of mine that I had. But, you know, it was a matter of, like, I had turned down all these other folks. Of course, these folks had, you know, subsequently made hiring decisions. And so it was like I'd essentially, like, exhausted that current round of hiring, right? So I was a little stuck to some degree. And then she got worse. And I wasn't dealing with microaggressions. I was dealing with outright racism. I was dealing with outright, ultimately harassment. Is what it was. And you know, I think we sometimes get so used to, like, calling things microaggressions that it's like, yeah, no, everything in microaggression. Like, some shit is just aggression. So was putting up with that. And, you know, was doing what I normally do, which is like, I'm fine. And I was clearly not fine at all. I mean, ultimately, I ended up in this beauty room on the floor, just bawling. And this is after like, at this point I had been there for going on a year. And, you know, some things had happened in between then. Why make my nose run? Some things that happened in between then where, like, there were some, you know, promises to make things change and, you know, just like the toxic relationship where they're like, they swear they're going to change. Those things that happened, none of that was the case. Nothing was changing and, you know, probably wasn't going to change for me at any point then. So, yeah, it just, the stress took a toll on me to the degree that I was just really in an unhealthy space. Mentally, it was impacting me physically. I was, you know, sick more than I've ever been sick in my life. It was just a lot. And so ended up one day and realized I need to talk to somebody. I need to, you know, get somebody. And so I, you know, did a search and I found somebody. And this time though, I was set on getting a Black therapist. A Black woman therapist, because what I was dealing with at the time wasn't something that I felt that anyone who had not lived the experience of being Black could understand. And I didn't want to explain it in the ways that you would have to explain to someone who doesn't have that lived experience. So I found a therapist who, as you know, if you follow me on Facebook, turned out to be a whole Gemini. I felt like that should have been on a website. Like, you should tell people you're a Gemini. Like, we should just be able to know. And I don't have nothing against Geminis. Some of my best friends are Geminis, and so is one of my babies. But I should be warned that, like, that's what I'm getting. And so get with Gemini therapist, and, you know, we navigate some of the things that I was dealing with. And I remember one of the first things that she told me really early was, you control your response to things. And I was like, no, I don't. I don't control if people make me mad. Like, if they do something that makes me mad, they did that, not me. And I was dead set on that. Like, no, people did things to make me to be angry and respond or whatever. I can certainly say when I came out of that therapy round, I certainly really do understand that I do control how I respond to things. I know I don't control other people's behavior. I don't control, you know, their actions and thoughts, but I control my own behaviors. Excuse me. So we worked through a lot of that, of what I was dealing with immediately. She gave me some tools and some resources, things that are really helpful for me, because I left that job. Like, I left, bounced the hell out. But what I got from that round, especially around like just, boundary setting in the workplace and doing it in a way that, like, I'm here or I'm here. I'm either like just gonna be like chill and not say nothing, or like I'm Southside cussing you out. And so really the middle ground is it's a difficult space for me, especially in the workplace. And so she helped me to navigate that. And so really setting boundaries up front early on, like as soon as somebody's behavior is out of pocket, like, let me help you out and let me teach you how to treat me. And so we don't even get to where it got with those folks. So, and also, right, you might be listening to this thinking like, Kende, like, you are the most like vocal person who's like always advocating for other people, yada yada. I am, and it is still different when it comes to myself, which is the case for a lot of people. Like, I will advocate for other folks like nobody's business, and then when it comes to myself, I can be a little different. Part of that is knowing that I call it like the Hulk syndrome. I know that there is no switch. Like, once I get to a particular place, like, I know there's no switch. And so I do my damnedest. Like, I try my hardest to not get to that place, right? Because again, there's 0 and there's 1,000. So part of it is that. And so a lot of people will interact with me and they will just get like Bruce Banner all the time. And they'll be like, oh, she just Bruce. I'm Bruce because, like, I know what happens when Hulk happens, and I don't want that for you. There are a few people I want that for, right? So that is where I was. So she gave me tools to navigate around that. And I was like, cool, boom, I'm healed. She was like, nah, sis, what about that trauma? And I'm like, but what you talking about? Like, I'm good. And, like a good therapist would, she thought that we should dive into that trauma. Cool. I was game. That doing trauma work is not easy work. Finding a therapist, first of all, finding a therapist that's a good fit is work. It is more work than it should be, in this country, especially like our healthcare system. It's a lot, even if you have insurance, navigating the system to find a therapist is very difficult, let alone if you don't. If you don't, then it becomes difficult and extremely expensive. I have been privileged enough since I've been in this area to often have like the best healthcare plans through my employers. That job I was speaking of is no exception. I had a really great health insurance plan. But finding a therapist was still a daunting task that required hours of researching and calling people and waiting for callbacks and sending emails. And we don't take this insurance. And a lot of Black therapists don't take insurance at all. And I forget the reasoning behind that. I think part of it is like insurance doesn't pay their full rate. And I'm not sure if there's something else to it. But I found that a lot of Black therapists did not take insurance. So it was a process, which is why it took me so long when I was dealing with all of that. Because I'm dealing with all of that on top of the stress of like finding a therapist. It was too much. But again, when you find yourself in a pool on the floor, it's time. So she's like, yeah, what about that trauma, sis? And I'm like, okay. And I remember one of the actually, here's what happened. I'm telling the story wrong. What happened was I said, I'm good. My trauma didn't impact me. I'm straight. And she was like, what? Next thing I know, she got me in a room where I'm sitting on a toddler chair. And like there are like kids art supplies and such all around me. So it's very clearly like a therapy space for children. And there's a huge whiteboard wall. And she's like, okay, let's start at the beginning. You were born. I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, tell me about your life. And I'm like, you want me to like name all the traumatic things that have happened to me since birth? Yeah. So we get started, and by the end of this exercise, I am looking at a wall of a timeline from my birth until now. Actually, it didn't even go until now. It went like to late, it went to mid 30s. And it didn't cover everything, but I'm looking at this wall and I'm thinking, who the fuck survives that? Like, who survives that? How do you survive that? And how do you come out of that and walk around saying that didn't impact me? And so it was this really jarring experience for me, because I have talked about a lot of events that were traumatic for me in my past. But what I usually do is I talk about those things separately, right? I rarely talked about them as the whole. And so there I was looking at this whole, and it was something. And so she was very effective in that sense. Like, nah, sis, you ain't okay. So we started doing the work. And again, it's rough work. You know, I think a lot of times you feel like the therapy session itself is the hardest part. Nah, it's the going home and having to sit with and reflect. And, you know, the work doesn't stop. The work doesn't just occur for an hour a week. So, you know, cool. We're moving along. It's fine. We get to the trauma around my having been sexually abused as a child. And Gemini therapist started talking about forgiveness. And I was like, you know, it's not really my thing as it relates to that particular person. I do believe in forgiveness. I do not believe that forgiveness is a requirement of me for every aspect of my healing. And what I mean is that I don't believe I have to forgive every person who has harmed me in order for me to be healed. So Gemini therapist brought up, you know, the forgiveness, and I was like, yeah, nah, not around this person. Like, I'm good. And I'll say, you know, I don't purport to be an expert in therapy, right? Like, I don't in any way believe that I am an expert on like all of the things I have to do with therapy. I do believe that I'm an expert on me, in the same way that I don't have an MD, but like if I go into a doctor, there are two people in that room. One is an expert in medicine and one is an expert on my body. So it's the same with therapy. And so let me grab a bronzer. So, you know, there we were. And she kind of, you know, talked about forgiveness at some point. Like, she kind of brought it up and I was like, you know, and she dropped it and then she brought it up again and I was still like, and ultimately what we came to, for her, was that she believed that therapy was a necessary part of my healing. Not therapy, I'm sorry. She believed forgiveness was a necessary component of my healing. Forgiveness of, in this particular instance, the man who sexually abused me when I was 6. Now, couple of things. While this happened when I was 6, and he denied it. He full out looked my 6-year-old self in the face, told me I was a liar. He looked my mom in the face and told her I was a liar. And until his deathbed, he had only ever admitted to one person that he did in fact sexually abuse me. And that was me. And he did it when no one else was around. Now, mind you, this came years after the fact, and whatever my feelings are around him, this was helpful. It was helpful to me that he said, like, you know, he apologized. He apologized, and what he said was, I'm sorry. And I think you know what I'm talking about. So that is the apology that I got after this man had made me think as a 6 and 7 and 8-year-old, because yes, a whole nother story as to why I was still even around this man. But like, so at some point I had started thinking that maybe he was right and maybe I had made it up, right? Like, and then I started to think, oh my gosh, I must be a really horrible person if I said he did this and he did, because this man was so adamant that this did not happen. That I started to question myself, which, unbeknownst to me at the time, was just more abuse, right? It was really abusive for him to do that to me as a child. And so he admitted, that just to me, but, he didn't do it he didn't tell everybody else that he, of course, had done this. And so for me, that him admitting that, like, that meant nothing. So there we are. And for me, forgiveness, if I'm going to forgive a person for something, and if I want someone to forgive me, I think an acknowledgement of the harm is important. I think an apology is important. I think, an attempt to atone is important. And I think it's also important that, it not just be like those private apologies. They get me. Like I don't get them, rather. Those private apologies are whack. Like, you done told my mama that I'm crazy. You done told, everybody else, my siblings and my cousins and my whole family. Most of my family was aware of what happened. And so, you done told all these people that, like, I'm a little lying 6-year-old. So, no, so that's where we were. So as far as I was concerned, he had not done what was required to. Okay, we gotta figure something else out. A little too much over there. He had not done what was required to even consider forgiveness. So I have moved on throughout my life, and I will say that while I don't believe that I, at the time of this therapy, and still, like, I'm not completely healed from all of the trauma around that happened to me. I do know that of the traumatic events that occurred, that particular one, being sexually abused by him, is an area where I can say with certainty that I have achieved healing around that. And part of that was because I wasn't depending on him to validate my thoughts or to validate, what had happened, or, to be truthful about what had happened to anyone else. He went to his grave never having admitted to everyone else. And so she was correct in that I did have a lot of trauma to heal from. She was incorrect that was one of the spaces. And so she brought up, this forgiveness thing a couple more times. I was still adamant that, like, that was not part of my journey. It is very important for survivors of trauma to dictate their journey. It is not for others to tell us what we need to do around our healing. Certainly we can go to people for advice and, other sorts of tools and resources, but no one can require that we do anything in order to facilitate that healing. And also I believe that the, whole unique forgiveness is about you and not them, and you can't be healed unless you forgive. I think that's, quite frankly, I think that's abusive to survivors. My healing can't be dependent on the person who harmed me, like that. No. In addition to that, if the person who harmed me hasn't changed their behavior and has in fact continued to harm me, well, forgiving them makes no sense, right? And so that was one of the questions that I had for Jim, that therapist at the time. I was like, so let me get this straight. Forgive folks, and if there is no change in behavior, then that means they are still harming us. And so should I forgive them again? And she said, yes. And I said, and again? And her response was yes. Look, I get it. There are some folks who subscribe to the biblical principle of, you know, forgiving folks 70 times 70 or whatever the number is. Interestingly enough, she was not a Christian, so she wasn't subscribing to that particular principle, but I get it, like people say. That ain't my ministry. No. That's not my ministry. If you harm me and I tell you that you've harmed me and you continue to harm me repeatedly, you will not be forgiven repeatedly. There are people who I have forgiven repeatedly, but ideally I'm forgiving you for different things. Or maybe, you know, you kind of, you know, accidentally did the thing that you did before. I don't know. But what I do know is that there is not going to be a continued pattern of forgiveness if you have decided to very intentionally, consciously continue on this path of harm. In fact, there's not going to be a continued pattern of forgiveness if you unintentionally keep doing this. Because if you unintentionally keep harming me, well, like, I can't keep going. You know what I mean? I just very recently had to end a friendship where that was happening. I don't believe it was his intent to continue harming me, but that is what kept happening. And so I gotta go. Forgiveness, cool. But like, I gotta separate myself from this because you clearly can't help yourself. And so what ultimately happened is that Gemini therapist got a little more adamant about this forgiveness thing. And at some point said that she did not believe I could be completely healed if I did not forgive him. This is what I mean when I say that I am an expert on me. And she might be an expert on therapy. For me, that is a boundary. The notion that I cannot heal if I can't be completely healed. And I don't even believe in complete healing. I believe that it's always a journey. But the notion that, like, in order to be healed, that was dependent on this man who had harmed me in such a way. I don't like that. So I ultimately made the decision that while Gemini therapist was great for, you know, helping me with, you know, sort of day-to-day stressors and trauma and things like that, that Gemini therapist was not the best fit for me around my historical trauma work. And that doesn't in any way mean that Gemini therapist isn't a good therapist. It doesn't mean that, like, you know, my healing stops or is going to be stagnant. It just means that on this particular, you know, topic, Gemini therapist was no longer the right therapist for me. Great. Like, you know, I enjoy our sessions. It really did often feel like talking to a homegirl who just had a few more tools in her pocket. You know, it was good. I may very well reach out in the future if I am, you know, for example, looking at something like if I have some, you know, if I'm having trouble navigating the day-to-day stressors, I would certainly reach out to her. But on the historical stuff, no. And so I say all of this to say that, you know, you really have to think about what you need. And to recognize, again, that you are the expert on you. If something doesn't fit your boundaries, and that's, you know, long before Gemini therapist even came into the picture, folks know I have always been talking about, you know, the notion that, like, I need to forgive folks or that anyone is required to forgive anyone. I've long talked about, no, that's not it. So, excuse me, it just happened that, like, you know, ultimately I got someone who had a different philosophy. What I will do in the future is I will ask that question up front. Certainly, I will cover that up front with when I go back to therapy. Because I'm going back to therapy. I mean, I need to. Like, I need to be in therapy. I'm going back, and so that is what I will do. I will just do more, due diligence on the front end. So yeah, that is my Black-owned film is just always a thing. So yeah, that is my therapy dropout story. We are currently now, in the middle of a pandemic. I will say that part of why I have navigated this pandemic in the way that I have is a direct result of tools that I got, some from Gemini therapists. It's been interesting for me that this has been a very rough year in many ways. But I have actually been, I think, at my healthiest mentally through this. And I think that's a direct result of a lot of things. And it's been interesting to have that, to simultaneously have the world like burning, in many cases literally, and also to be in a space where I feel like you're okay. You're handling this. You are okay. And so, and I know that part of that is very much the privilege of having a job that has been secure through all of this, and, not having to stress about that. And by the grace of God, having the means to help my children stay indoors more, and, really to just keep talking to them about how, because that's certainly been stressful for me. My children are spread across the country, and I have not seen them. That I've seen the daughter in blue, because I was there for his birth. But, I haven't seen my kids. I haven't seen my oldest or my youngest sons since this happened. So it's not easy. And, thankfully there's technology that lets us stay connected. So I recognize that in a lot of ways, I have had access to, things that make this a bit less stressful. Of course, it's still a pandemic, and I'm still a person who navigates depression and being in the house all the time and rarely getting sun, and then it being cold, and didn't have any time to get out in the summer. It's rough. I think even the anticipation of winter was traumatic in and of itself. Just kind of like, Lord, what's gonna happen when the sun sets earlier, when it's cold, when I can't really be getting outside for at least some walks and wandering aimlessly around town. Not too aimlessly, because people still don't like to wear masks. And I want you to have on a mask even if we passing outside. Like, if we walking past each other, I just feel like you should do that. So yeah. But I've been doing okay. And I absolutely credit therapy for that. So, like I said, none of what I've said in this conversation is a matter of me saying, oh, don't go to therapy. Quite the contrary. It is saying go to therapy if you can, if you have access. A couple of resources. There is Therapy for Black Girls. It's a website that has therapists for Black girls, bunch of Black folks. And then also Psychology Today has a website that you can go to. You can enter your location and your insurance, and it will pull up therapists who take your insurance. Those were the resources that I used in my search. And patience, like, just go in knowing that it could very well be a process. It can get even more stressful when it's 3 weeks, a month in, 2 months in, and you're still looking. Also, remember that, like, this is basically an interview process. Just because you choose a therapist and go to them, doesn't mean you have to stick with them. If you decide they're not the best fit, you can move on. Like, you know, your insurance doesn't preclude you from switching therapists. So don't feel like, you know, if you find someone who's not a fit, you know, because, yeah, there's also, you know, keep in mind that a lot of Black folks right now are understanding the value of having a Black therapist. And because of that, a lot of Black therapists are booked. So folks got waiting lists, and that can be frustrating. So just go into it knowing that it could be a process, but that it is a process that is worth it in the end, I believe. I think in the end, it is worth going through what you go through to get there. So, you know, as you know, usual, like, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them for you around my process. I don't really have much more than that in terms of like the resources that I used to get there. And so, yeah, don't let people tell you that therapy is not for Black folks. Actually, it is. It's even more necessary for Black folks. I mean, we live in a country that every day tries to find new ways to kill us. So, I think that warrants a little bit of necessary needing some therapy. So, don't subscribe to that notion. Do not. Listen. Your friends are not your therapist. Your significant other is not your therapist. Your mama is not your therapist. Your daddy ain't your therapist. They can be helpful. They can be sounding boards. They can be folks that you go to for advice. They can be the most amazing people. They are not substitutes for therapists. And it's not fair. You know, this is a thing that I think happens a lot in romantic partnerships. And very specifically, a thing that happens with men who date women and the ways that they put the women in the position of being their therapist, of serving as their therapist. And that's just not fair to your partner. One, because, you know, unless your partner is a therapist, they don't even have the tools. Also, if they are a therapist, I think there's like some sort of conflict of interest if they are a therapist. I dated one person who was a therapist. That didn't last long. Homie straight tried to psychoanalyze me one day. Listen, we not going. We not going, bro. But yeah, so don't, you know, while they can be helpful, don't put that burden on other folks, and don't put that burden on yourself. It's harder to talk to people who are so close and connected to your experiences, and often who are directly related to the trauma that you have experienced. I mean, I don't know how, like, y'all want to stay while I do my hair? You can if you want to. I'm gonna grab me some hoops. Pretty sure that hoops are like part of what, you know, activate the magic. Cause do you see? Y'all don't need to see my hair. I'll do that in another video. I will just wrap this up. Actually, let me do my hair before I wrap this up. I'll be right back. Wait, 1 second. As always, thanks for joining me. If you like the video, then share it with your friends. And I will see you next time. In the meantime, I hope that you have a positive, peaceful, and productive day. And remember, if you only get to choose 2 of those, go with positive and peaceful. Bye, survivors and thrivers.